soon legislation extending programs and funding structures for the Federal Aviation Administration, along with some surface transportation provisions. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Rabbi, for 40 years of the Temple Beth El in Providence, Rhode Island, will now lead the Senate in prayer.
O God, whose Spirit is with us in every righteous act, we invoke your blessing upon the elected representatives of our government. Enlighten with your wisdom those whom the people have entrusted with the guardianship of our rights and liberties. On this day, proclaimed as the International Day of Democracy, we pray that our country may ever be a beacon of freedom, justice, and peace. We pray for those in other lands who are oppressed and persecuted. Grant that this new day not be lost to us. May it be filled with your purpose and our labors rewarded by the satisfaction gained by all who pursue a life of righteousness, virtue, and honor. Amen.
Please join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will now read. The clerk will now read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 15, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Sheldon Whitehouse, a senator from the state of Rhode Island, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The majority leader is recognized.
I'd like the senators from Rhode Island to have the privilege of the floor at this time.
Without objection.
Mr. Senator.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to thank and commend Senator Whitehouse for inviting Rabbi Leslie Gutterman here to deliver the prayer. Les Gutterman has been an extraordinary figure in our state, a man of great wisdom and compassion and kindness who has, since 1970, contributed extraordinarily to the state of Rhode Island and to the people of Rhode Island. His ministry goes far beyond denominational lines. He literally is the rabbi for everyone in Rhode Island. In fact, he's my rabbi, and I'm pleased and proud to say that. So, Mr. President, again, I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Gutterman here today.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, it's a great honor and a great pleasure to join my senior Senator Jack Reed in welcoming Rabbi Leslie Gutterman from Providence, Rhode Island, here onto the Senate floor to open the Senate on this day by leading us in prayer. Rabbi Gutterman is a personal friend, but he is more than that. He is a person of real significance in the Rhode Island community. He has served as the rabbi of Temple Beth El for 40 years, which means that he has officiated at the weddings of the children of people whose bar mitzvahs he officiated at. And he's officiated at the bar mitzvahs of the grandchildren of people whose weddings he has officiated at. He is an important part of the Rhode Island community. He has been described as a community asset and a moral compass for Rhode Island. And in addition, he is just a wonderful person. He and his wife, Janet, have come here today to join us, and we are just very proud and delighted that we could share this moment of the morning with our colleagues and with Rabbi Gutterman. So I yield the floor back to the Majority Leader with great pride in the presence of Rabbi Gutterman on our floor this morning.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for an hour. The majority will control the first half. Republicans will control the final half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of H.A. Res. 66, which is a joint resolution regarding Burma sanctions and the legislative vehicle for additional FEMA funding. The filing deadline for all first-degree amendments to the substitute amendment to H.A. Res. 66 is 1 p.m. today. I filed cloture on the substitute amendment and on H.A. Res. 66 last night. No agreement is reached. There will be a cloture vote on the substitute amendment tomorrow morning. We hope we can reach an agreement to complete action on the joint resolution as well as FAA and highway extension today. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. Mr. President, Malcolm Wallop is a man that I served in the Senate with for approximately 10 years. He represented the state of Wyoming. During that time, I can remember the work that he and Alan Simpson did together, Alan Simpson, another retired senator from Wyoming. He died yesterday. He was 78 years old. Senator Wallop was a fine man. His roots in Wyoming stem back to pioneer ancestors in the Bighorn. Although he was born in New York, he served his country admirably in the Army and then worked for many years as a cattle rancher and businessman before running for office. He was extremely good friends with the great Nevadan Paul Laxalt. There were occasions when Malcolm and I didn't agree on political issues, but he was always an agreeable man, a very fine man, and I honor his service today, both as a soldier and a senator, and certainly will miss him, as everyone in Wyoming will, and all of his colleagues who worked with him here in the Senate. Mr. President, in my office, right across the hall, I have a wonderful picture painted by a Nevadan. It's a big, big painting, and it shows this handsome young man on this horse with all the trappings of a horse that is really nice, beautiful, nice horse, beautiful saddle, and all the adornments on this man's clothes are good. I'm sure the painting didn't take into consideration how he really looked when he arrived in Las Vegas Valley, because this man, Rafael Rivera, was the first non-Indian to see the Las Vegas Valley. And I'm sure he was worn out and tired because he was basically lost. He is part of a expedition, a Spanish expedition, and he left them almost 100 miles from where he wound up in Las Vegas. But for us, Rafael Rivera is the person that's found at Las Vegas. He was able to see this beautiful place in 1829. And as a result of that, we have a number of facilities named after Rafael Rivera, as well they should be in Las Vegas Valley. The picture is painted perfectly. It shows Las Vegas Valley, Sunrise Mountain. The difference is there are no people there. Now there's 3 million people in Nevada, and we have a little Sunrise Mountain there, and in the painting, it's no one or anything around it. But of course now there's buildings and hotels and lots of stuff there. Today, though, Mr. President, I join more than 50 million Hispanic Americans in the United States in marking the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month. This celebration of history and culture lasts through 15th of October. So I look forward to the opportunity of bringing Hispanic heritage and all that has to Nevada and the rest of the country, to honor the contributions of a population that is such an integral part of our national identity. For hundreds of years, Latinos have helped shape the face of this nation. Mr. President, I wrote a history of my birthplace, Searchlight, Nevada. And one of the interesting things I found in my research is the railroad that was built into Searchlight in the early 1900s. It was 26 miles, and it was a difficult railroad to build. But it was basically built by Mexicans who had come to the United States to do the labor that it took to do that. Some 7,000 of them it took to build that railroad. Less than, not a very long one, it's 26 miles long, but it took a lot of work to get that done. So every place you go in America, every place especially you go in the West, you find the contributions made by Hispanics. They've made contributions in the battlefield, in the workplace, in the classroom. They've spurred progress in the laboratory, playing field, and all athletics, and, of course, in our halls of justice. They've shaped the way we farm and the way we do business. They've influenced our art and our literature. At construction sites and casinos and shopping centers around the state of Nevada, they've contributed mightily to that work that's being done and has been done. Their language has even influenced the name of the state of Nevada, which means snow-covered. Las Vegas means the meadows in Spanish. Hispanic Americans have also played an important role in this nation's armed forces, as I mentioned just a minute ago. They've served in every conflict since the Revolutionary War. Nearly 30,000 of them fought for our country in Iraq and Afghanistan and are still fighting. I thank them for their brave and dedicated service. And every year, Latinos help propel contributions to our economy. More than 2.3 million Hispanic-owned businesses employ millions of Americans and provide crucial goods and services. And before, Mr. President, leaving the subject of veterans and the good things they do, I want to make sure that the Republican leader recognizes that we all celebrate a Kentuckian who today is going to be awarded the Medal of Honor for this 21-year-old boy in the hills of Afghanistan saved the lives of about 40 soldiers. One person, they had a wonderful piece on public broadcasting today about his courage and what he did. Of course, wounded himself, but he carried people to and from battle and saved the lives, as I indicated, of a couple of score people. His name was Dakota Myers, and so I congratulate the Republican leader for having such fine people come from the state of Kentucky. Today, the Senate recognizes the commitment of more than 50 million Hispanic Americans, family, community, and country, and that's the way it should be. Mr. President, I want to spread on the record how much I appreciate the support of the Republicans in allowing us to be able to get on the FEMA bill. We're on that bill now. We have some amendments pending. If we're not able to work out an agreement on that today, we'll have votes on a number of cloture issues relating to that most important legislation affecting millions of Americans who have been devastated by Mother Nature. I'm disappointed, however, in one of our Republican colleagues who at this stage is holding up something that's so vitally necessary. The House sent to us two pieces of legislation that passed overwhelmingly in the House. One that will keep 1.7 or 8 million people working on a highway construction and other things around the country dealing with highways. That's an extension of 6 months. They also sent to us a 4-month extension, fully funded, of the Federal Aviation Administration, also vitally important. Unless my friend, the junior senator from Oklahoma, unless he agrees to allow us to go forward on this, one senator will stop 80,000 people from working. I hope he would reconsider. The issue that he has presented is a little unusual. He says that he doesn't like bike paths being part of the highway bill. Well, for most Americans, they're absolutely important. It's good for purposes of allowing people to travel without burning all the fossil fuel on the highways. I got up this morning very early and I went out and did my exercise. I'm not exaggerating. Scores, at least 30 or 40 bikes. So scores may be a slight exaggeration of people, not just for exercise, traveling to work. Their backpacks on, they're going to work. That's what bike paths are all about. And we've told my friend, the senator from Oklahoma, you don't like it, we'll have a vote on it. No, he said, I don't want to vote. I just want whatever I want it stuck in that bill. We can't do that. That isn't what the House sent us, and we can't do that. He said, well, separate the two bills. We have the bills from the House of Representatives. That's the arrangement that we've made, and it's a good arrangement to get these two vitally important pieces of legislation passed so that we can keep people, almost 2 million people, working. I'm disappointed in that. I hope that we can work something out during the day, because it's really unfair for him to hold up this extremely important legislation. There isn't a state in the Union that doesn't have problems with 80,000 people being laid off. In Nevada, we have a new tower being built at McCarran Field. It's something that's really important. These people will have to stop working. That's wrong. One senator, not fair to the Senate or to the country. Would the chair announce the business today?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois.
ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the report this week about the rate of poverty in America is an eye-opener. The numbers that have been reported are stunning. The number of Americans living in poverty now stands at 46.2 million. That's 46.2 million people. That's an increase of 8.9 million since 2007, just in 4 years. This has increased significantly since the year 2000. The poverty threshold, incidentally, for a mother and father with 2 children is an annual income of $22,000 a year. That's less than $2,000 a month. So for that family of 4, what we're saying is 46 million Americans make less than that. I think all of us understand how difficult it is in this day and age to survive and raise a family. But this national poverty rate should be a wake-up call to us, and I hope it puts a couple things in perspective. I spoke on the floor yesterday about visiting a warehouse in Champaign, Illinois, for the food depositories in the area. It's a warehouse where they process and send out food for food pantries that are managed by local groups, churches, and the like. Almost every state has them. I'm sure they do. And I was in this warehouse during the August recess to talk about the increased volume of people who are going to food pantries on a regular basis. I visit these food pantries to introduce myself to those who are coming in and to learn as much as they want to tell me about their circumstances. Well, at this warehouse in Champaign, Illinois, was a woman who was very attractive and well-dressed and standing there, and I assumed she worked at the warehouse. And it turned out I was wrong, because she said at one point she was a teacher's aide in the local school district. And I thought, why is she here? I kept thinking to myself, I wonder why this woman is here. Maybe she's on the board of this food depository. Well, it turns out she was there to tell me her story. She's a single mom with 2 young children. She has a full-time job as a teacher's aide in the school district. And because her income is below the poverty level, she qualifies for not only food stamps, but also uses these food pantries. And she said to me she wanted to express her gratitude that we now have extended the SNAP program, food stamp program, to include fresh produce, fruits and vegetables. And she said, it means I can take my kids to the local farmers market, and they get to meet the farmers, and they get to ask questions and hear stories about where these things come from, the fruits and vegetables that we buy, and she says, I get to buy healthy food to give my kids. It was an eye-opener, because I never would have picked her out of the crowd as a person who needed help to feed her children. And she did. And she told me without this, I would be struggling. It's an eye-opener, too, I hope, for all of America, when you hear that 46 million of us are living in poverty. These are our neighbors, our friends, the people we go to church with. These are folks you may see in the store. And they're people who are struggling, and many of them working, but not making enough money. Some have full-time jobs. Many have part-time jobs. And it's a reminder, as we get into this deficit debate, never to lose sight of the safety net in America. We are a kind and caring people. We've proven that over many generations. We do things that many other countries don't do. For one thing, we have our young men and women volunteer to risk their lives in foreign lands to try to bring peace. In addition to that, we've been engaged for over a century in helping other countries that are struggling. I just received a handwritten letter from 2 grade school children in Illinois about those who were starving in Somalia. It was a heartfelt letter asking me to do something. Not unusual. It's a sentiment expressed over and over again in our country. We need to have the same empathy and the same compassion for our own in America. And what that means is not only saying good things and perhaps helping through our churches and other charities, but also making certain that the safety net programs in our country are there for those who are struggling. We're engaged in a mighty debate now about deficit reduction. I've been part of it for a little while in some capacities, and I keep reminding those who are in the debate that there are some programs that are absolutely essential. Some of them are obvious. The food stamp program, to make sure that the lady I mentioned and others like her have enough food for their children. The Medicaid program, which provides health insurance for 1/3 of America's children. In Illinois, pays for over 50% of the births and takes care of our elderly when they're in the nursing home and run out of their savings. So as we talk about deficit reduction, let us focus on making certain at the end of the day the safety net is still in place. Let us make sure that the child care deductions that we have in the tax code are there for working families. The Earned Income Tax Credit, a program started under President Reagan, which acknowledges that many people who are working still need a helping hand in our tax code. Medicaid that I mentioned earlier, the food stamp program, housing programs for those who are homeless and need a helping hand. The safety net has to be honored and has to be preserved in the course of our deficit debate. But I would also say at this point, the President has really challenged us to stop giving speeches and to start moving forward on getting America back to work. He's made a proposal in last Thursday's joint session of Congress to give working families across America a payroll tax cut. What would it mean in Illinois? The average income in Illinois is about $53,000 a year, and the President's payroll tax cut would be worth $1,400 to every family making that amount of money. That's $120 a month. It may not sound like much to people who are wealthy, but for those who are struggling paycheck to paycheck, it could make a difference. President Obama wants to give more income security to middle-income families. That's what his proposal is about. And he's turned around and said when it comes to small businesses, let us give them incentives to hire the unemployed. The only line the President delivered a week ago that I remember, got a standing ovation from both sides, is when the President said, let's incentivize employers to hire our veterans. Everybody stood up. We know that's the right thing. They served our country. They came home. We ought to give them a hand to help. That's part of the President's plan. But he went beyond it and said if people have been unemployed and an employer is willing to hire them, let us give them a tax credit to do it. So the President is moving tax benefits to small businesses, the so-called job creators that we hear so much about, and I believe they are, as well as to working families. But it's all paid for. And this is where many Republicans take exception. How does the President pay for getting America back to work? He asks for sacrifice from the wealthiest people in America. There are some members of the Republican Party who would not impose 1 penny more in taxes on the wealthiest people in America. They are prepared to see every other family sacrifice except for those who can sacrifice without feeling any pain in their lives. I don't think that's fair, and I think the President's right. Those who are making the highest incomes in America should join with every other family in America and help us get beyond this recession. And also, the President starts eliminating the subsidies, the federal subsidies for oil companies. I don't have to remind Americans what the price of gasoline is. They know it. In Illinois, it's over $4 a gallon, many places that I traveled to during the recess. And these oil companies are witnessing the highest profits in the history of American business. The President has said, and I agree, it's time to cut the federal subsidy, the tax subsidy for oil companies, these profitable companies that make so much money for their shareholders and give so many bonuses to their officers. So many Republicans object to this. They don't want to raise taxes on the oil companies. They don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest people in America. I just think that they ought to put it in perspective. If we can help middle-income and working families get through the recession, stop living paycheck to paycheck, and have a little bit of a cushion in their lives, if we can give small businesses an incentive to hire Americans and turn this economy around, that's what America needs. Let's get beyond the rhetoric that has stalled efforts in Washington. Let's get beyond the obstructionism and the obstacles. Let us finally work together with the President's leadership and come up with a plan to put America back to work. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. The Republican leader is recognized.
In a ceremony at the White House this afternoon, Sergeant Dakota Meyer of the United States Marine Corps will become the first living Marine recipient of the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for valor. He will be the first recipient in 41 years. The Medal of Honor is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and bravery at the risk of one's own life above and beyond the call of duty. Every American can be proud of Sergeant Meyer, age 23, for his exceptional valor in combat in Afghanistan. And I'm particularly proud that Sergeant Meyer is a Kentuckian. I'm honored that heroes like him come from the Bluegrass State. Sergeant Meyer hails from Columbia, Kentucky, and is a 2006 graduate of Greene County High School, where he played on the football team. On September the 8th, 2009, his unit assignment was with Marine Embedded Training Team 2A, Regional Corps Advisory Command 37, operating in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. That day, he was sent to aid a group of Marines, soldiers, and Afghans trapped under heavy enemy fire from 3 different sides. We're surrounded, one of them broadcast over the radio. They're moving in on us. Air support to assist the Marines was unavailable, as the fighting was too fierce for helicopters to land. Then Corporal Meyer requested permission to enter the zone of fire and come to their aid 4 times. And 4 times his request was denied. After 4 denials, he decided to go anyway in an armored vehicle mounted with a .50 caliber machine gun with 1 other Marine as a driver. Twice they attempted to reach their comrades, and twice were forced back by bullets, rocket-propelled grenades, and mortars. A bullet hit the vehicle's gun turret, striking Corporal Meyer's elbow with shrapnel. Ignoring his injury, he left the vehicle and charged ahead alone to rescue his fellow fighters. Under intense enemy fire, he reached a trench where helicopter pilots had reported their position. There he found his 3 fellow Marines and a Navy hospital corpsman, all dead from gunshot wounds. Still under fire, Corporal Meyer carried their bodies back to a Humvee with the help of Afghan troops and escorted them to a forward operating base about a mile away. He was determined to fulfill the Marines' credo, to never leave a Marine behind. Corporal Meyer and the 3 Marines who he refused to abandon all knew each other well and worked together in the same 4-man training team. He considered them close friends. In addition to the 4 men Corporal Meyer pulled out of the firefight, a U.S. Army soldier and at least 8 Afghan troops plus an Afghan interpreter were killed in the attack. They had faced more than 50 enemy insurgents armed with machine guns, assault rifles, and rocket-propelled grenades during a 6-hour firefight. Now a sergeant, Meyer combines his great heroism with great humility. "This is not about me," he just said. "If anything comes out of it for me, it's for those guys." He left active duty service in June 2010 and currently serves in the inactive Ready Reserve of the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. And Mr. President, I know my colleagues join me in saluting Sergeant Dakota Meyer for his extraordinary display of selfless valor, for which he will be awarded the Medal of Honor at the White House ceremony this afternoon. He may not think of himself a hero, but his country certainly does. His heroism and meritorious service has already been recognized in the many awards, medals, and decorations he has received, including the Purple Heart, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with V device for valor, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. His fellow Kentuckians and an entire grateful nation thank him for his service. Brave men and women like him honor us and our country and make us proud that America boasts the finest armed forces in the world. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, it's been a week now since the President unveiled his second stimulus. And today, a week later, White House aides are expecting to hold a briefing to explain it all to the Democrats who don't understand the details. Well, one would think they'd want to be briefed on details before the President demanded they pass it right away, not after. But then again, the White House probably expected stronger support from Democrats than it's gotten so far. After all, this bill's top selling point, according to the President, was that both parties should like it. Yet so far, the only thing both parties in Congress seem to agree on is that it's got to be a better way than this. Earlier this week, after several of us suggested that the President would have a hard time convincing members of his own party to support this plan, a number of them have proved us right. While the President was out in Ohio insisting over and over again that Congress pass the bill, it seemed like the only Democrats who were even willing to talk about it here on Capitol Hill were tearing it apart. You had the Democratic Majority Leader basically treating it like a legislative afterthought. One freshman senator called parts of the bill frustrating and unfair. Another Democrat called a central part of the bill terrible. One veteran Democrat was tampering down expectations of it passing in one piece. And another veteran Democrat suggested a completely different approach to jobs altogether. So I know the President and his advisors are keen on this idea of making Republicans look bad, but from what I can tell, he's got a bigger problem at the moment lining up supporters in his own party. And that brings me to the real issue. The truth is, the President has a problem that no amount of political strategizing can solve. His economic policies simply haven't worked. Yet he and his advisors seem to be the only folks in Washington who aren't ready to admit it. I mean, we're in the middle of a crisis. The average length of unemployment is at an all-time high. Median income is going down instead of up. Poverty levels are higher than they've been in nearly 2 decades. Millions of Americans can't find work. The numbers just keep getting worse. And the President's solution is to demand another Washington stimulus bill. Because the first one worked out so well? The first stimulus is a national punchline, turtle tunnels, sidewalks to nowhere. And now we're hearing reports that the White House fast-tracked a $500 million loan to a politically connected energy firm that their own analysts said wasn't ready for prime time. This place, this energy firm, was supposed to be the poster child of how the original stimulus would create jobs. Now it's bankrupt, and most of its 1,100 employees are out of work. And they want another stimulus? Look, even if you don't know about any of the waste or the alleged cronyism, here's the bottom line. 2.5 years after the President signed the first stimulus, there are 1.7 million fewer jobs in this country. 1.7 million fewer jobs after borrowing and spending $825 billion to create them. What more do you need to know than that? We've done that. We've gone down that road before. Shouldn't we try something different? How about we do what just about every job creator in America is telling us they need in order to create jobs? Tax reform, loosening the grip of government regulations, and free trade agreements. That's how we'll create a better environment for jobs in our country. It might mean the President doesn't get his tax hikes, but it would mean more jobs. Now, I know that some people sometimes get attached to a single idea, and this President seems to have come into office with one big idea, that there isn't a problem that we have in this country that bigger government can't solve. But at a certain point, you've got to take stock. You've got to check the results and see how you're doing. And I think it's pretty clear to most people what the results suggest. Mr. President, it's time to change course. I yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois is recognized.
Remaining on the Democratic side.
18.5 minutes.
Well, I see several of my Republican colleagues here, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent that they be allowed to use their morning business time and that our 18 minutes remaining be preserved until after their speeches.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Tennessee is recognized.
I thank the distinguished Democratic whip for his courtesy. Republican senators have come to the floor today to talk about education, No Child Left Behind, and I ask consent that we be allowed to engage in a colloquy.
Without objection.
I thank the President, and could you, the senators who will be here will be Senator Isaacson, Burr, Kirk, and Senator Enzi. Will you let each of us know when we've consumed 5 minutes?
The chair will do so.
I thank the President. Mr. President, in the world in which we live, every American's job is on the line. And as every American knows, better schools mean better jobs. And schools and jobs are alike in this sense. Washington can't create good jobs, and Washington can't create better schools. But Washington can create an environment in which others can create good jobs, and in which teachers and principals and students and a community can create better schools along with their parents. So a good place for Washington to start is with the 5 pieces of legislation that we introduced today to fix the legislation known as No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was a bipartisan effort in 2001 and 2002. President Bush and Democratic members of the Senate and the House and Republicans as well agreed on it. By 2014, the legislation said the 50 million students in our public schools, in nearly 100,000 public schools, would be proficient in reading and math. There would be state standards and tests to those standards and requirements that the more than 3,000 teachers be highly qualified. There would be school report cards by subgroups of students. And schools who failed to make what was called adequate yearly progress would receive federal sanctions. There would be more choices of schools and charter schools for parents. During the last 9 years, federal funding for schools has increased by 73%, even though student achievement has stayed relatively flat. Our legislative proposals today would set a new, realistic, but challenging goal to help all students succeed and to end the federal mandates, which has Washington, D.C. deciding which students and teachers are succeeding and failing. Our legislation would require states to have high standards that promote college and career readiness for all students, would continue the reporting of student progress so parents and teachers and communities can know whether students are succeeding. It would encourage teacher and principal evaluation systems relating especially to student achievement. That would replace the federal definition of a highly qualified teacher. It would consolidate federal programs and make it easier to transfer funds within local school districts. It would expand charter schools and give parents more choices. And for the bottom 5% of schools, the federal government would actively help states turn them around. Mr. President, much has happened during the last 10 years, and it's time to transfer back to states and to local governments the responsibility for deciding whether schools and teachers are succeeding or failing. Since 2002, 44 states have adopted common core academic standards. 2 groups of states are developing common tests to see whether students are meeting those standards. And more than 40 states are working together to develop common principles for holding schools accountable for student achievement. Thanks to No Child Left Behind, we now have several years of school-by-school information about student progress that puts the spotlight on success, and it puts the spotlight on where work needs to be done. In addition, many states and school districts are finding ways to reward outstanding teaching and school leadership, and to include student performance as a part of that evaluation. As common sense as that idea may seem, not until Tennessee created the Master Teacher Program in 1984 had one state paid one teacher 1 penny more for teaching well. All of the sponsors of the 5 pieces of legislation we introduced today are Republicans. But many of the ideas were either first advanced or have been worked out in concert with President Obama and with his excellent Education Secretary, Arne Duncan, as well as with Democratic senators here and with Republican and Democratic colleagues in the House. In other words, we've made a lot of progress. In the Senate, my judgment is we're not far from agreement on a bipartisan bill with most of the differences of opinion centering around what I would characterize—
Senator, 5 minutes has expired.
I ask for 2 more minutes. Thank you.
Without objection.
Characterized as including provisions that would create a national school board. Mr. President, we on the Republican side want to continue to work with our colleagues across the aisle in the House. Our purpose in offering our ideas today is to spur progress so we can enact a bill before the end of the year. The House of Representatives has enacted its first bill to fix No Child Left Behind. It would expand charter schools. It's like the charter school bill that Senator Kirk will introduce today. The President has given us his blueprint. He has met with us. The Secretary has warned us that under existing law, most schools will be labeled as failing schools within a few years, and he is proposing to use his waiver authority to avoid that. The Secretary clearly has that waiver authority under the law, and I support his use of it in appropriate ways. I'm introducing legislation today to make it clear that, to me, the appropriate use means using the waiver to accept or reject state proposals based upon whether those proposals enhance student achievement and not to impose a new set of Washington mandates. But the best way for us to relieve the Secretary of the need to consider waivers and to help American children learn what they need to know and be able to do is to us to work together in the Senate and in the House to fix No Child Left Behind. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record following my remarks, or following the remarks of all of the senators, the following information: why we need to fix No Child Left Behind, how the environment has changed in the past 10 years, a summary of the 9 proposals that Secretary Duncan and Senator Harkin, Senator Enzi, and others of us have worked on, a summary of the legislation introduced by Senator Isaacson to change Title I, that I'm a principal sponsor of to change Title II, a summary of Senator Burr's proposal on Titles II and IV, Senator Kirk's summary on charter schools, and the summary of the legislation on waivers. And now, Mr. President,
Without objection, the senator's 2 minutes is expired.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Isaacson of Georgia has a distinguished career in education, not just as a leader in the Senate of Georgia, but as the chairman of the Georgia School Board appointed by Governor Zell Miller, and as a member of the House of Representatives and a key author in 2001 and 2002 when No Child Left Behind was enacted.
I thank the recognition by the great senator from the state of Tennessee, whose own record in education is quite distinguished, everything from a university president at the University of Tennessee to his leader on the Health, Education, and Pensions Committee, and obviously his service as Secretary of Education of the United States of America. I appreciate the reference to 10 years ago when we wrote No Child Left Behind. There were 9 of us, 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats, who locked ourselves up in the House Education Committee offices for about 6 weeks, writing a document that became the law of the land and has served the country well for 10 years. Title I provision of that is the free and reduced lunch provision. It's the main title of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it's the main title that delivers educational content requirements and regulations under No Child Left Behind. The reason that I'm a sponsor, the principal sponsor of the reform of Title I is because No Child Left Behind requirements under Title I have worked, and it is time to go to the next step. And I want to be very specific about saying it worked. As everyone knows, adequate yearly progress, or AYP, is the goal of Title I, to see to it that every child every year is making adequate yearly progress towards improvements in reading, comprehension, and mathematics. When we started AYP, we knew when we wrote it that if the bill worked, it would become harder and harder and harder to reach AYP because the baseline was being built every single year. And the reason Senator Alexander talked about so many schools falling into needs improvement is because we've pushed the achievement level so high that meeting AYP on a continuing improving basis is difficult. So it is time to terminate AYP as a requirement of the bill, but it's not time to throw out the system that made it work. Disaggregation of students, first of all, was critically important. In public education in the United States prior to the No Child Left Behind law, school systems and schools basically hid behind mean average scores, or an ITBS mean average score, or a comparison of ITBS test scores to other states in the nation, which was an aggregation of all students' performance and an averaging of that performance. It took the eye off the ball. It took the eye off the individual student. So what No Child Left Behind did said you will test every student. You will disaggregate them by sex, by race, by disability, by non-English speaking, and you will rate each disaggregated group on AYP, and if only one of those groups in a school or a system fails to make adequate yearly progress, then the whole school goes into needs improvement. And so you have a lot of schools being labeled needs improvement while they're making the best improvement they've ever made. So it is time to end AYP, but it's not time to end the disaggregation or the test score. The greatest accountability measure, and all of us as politicians know it, is transparency. This bill will require the transparency of all the test scores of each individual child and each individual transparency of each individual disaggregated group to ensure we continue to know how our kids are doing and compare them on a year-to-year basis. But we do away with needs improvement because it has served its purpose. Now, on disaggregated groups, there's one other thing the Title I change does that I want to particularly emphasize on the floor today. The biggest disaggregated group in terms of causing systems or schools to fall in needs improvement are those special needs children considered under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act. They are all individuals who have an individual disability that affects their academic achievement or their ability to learn. When we passed the IDEA in 1978, if I remember correctly, in Public Law 94-192, we dictated that we would give special emphasis in training those special needs kids and try and identify their special needs and meet them within the public education system. When No Child Left Behind disaggregated them into a single group and tested them, we tested 98% of them with the same paper and pencil test. Now, these are kids with a plethora of different disabilities that one single test could not possibly meet. We gave a 2% cognitive waiver, a disability waiver, so that they could have an alternative assessment for up to 2% of the students, but 98% had to take the same test. This reform of the IDEA portion of Title I of No Child Left Behind simply says this: every year, in the beginning of the school year, when the parent and the teacher and the school meet to put out the individual education plan, the IEP for that student, the parent, the teacher, and the school will determine what the assessment vehicle that best measures the assessment of that child will be, not a single one-size-fits-all paper and pencil test. That is going to ensure that IDEA students get the individual attention they deserve and the measurement against the individual disabilities that they have that's appropriate as approved by their parent, their teacher, and their school. And it will make a remarkable difference for our IDEA kids, and I'm very proud of that provision and the flexibility it gives to the systems to assess appropriately rather than force a one-size-fits-all test against 98% of our disabled or children with disabilities. So to repeat where I said at the beginning,
Senator's 5 minutes has expired.
Good time for me to repeat what I said at the beginning. I'm proud to be building on the success of No Child Left Behind, and I'm proud that Senator Alexander has taken the leadership on this committee to move forward on the reauthorization of IDEA and No Child Left Behind.
Senator Isakson for his leadership in education in the state of Georgia and on this bill. Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina has for years focused on elementary and secondary education, especially on making it easier for local school districts to use the federal dollars that are made available and on finding ways to encourage student and teacher evaluation. He is introducing a bill which I'm proud to co-sponsor on Titles II and Title IV.
I thank the senator from a state once owned by North Carolina and a distinguished member of this august body. Mr. President, what are we simply here doing today? We're responding to what every CEO has said and every local leader has said and every parent has said. If you want a future in this country, you've got to fix K-12 education. You've got to make sure that every child in this country has the foundational knowledge to meet whatever challenge they're faced with in a lifetime. Now, Washington's good at sort of coming up with new programs, and to be honest with you, when you look back over the history of the last couple decades, every year we come up with a new program to fix K through 12. What's the obvious thing? We never fix it. But the one thing that we hear loud and clear from people who are on the front lines, those elected and those non-elected, those who are charged with educating our children, is, my gosh, give me flexibility. You can't design one program in Washington that works in Raleigh, North Carolina, and works in Knoxville, Tennessee, much less in rural North Carolina or rural Tennessee. What I propose today is very simple, that 59 pots of money, 59 different programs, be merged into 2 pots, and that those local school systems have the flexibility and the capability to choose what they're going to use that money for to educate our kids. What a novel thought, that we would take the people on the front line. You see, for the first time, I'm suggesting Washington give up the power that we've got to say, you'll do it our way, or you won't get the money. We're faced in the future with some degree of austerity. We're not going to have the money to throw it out and see what works. But that's Washington's typical response. Now it's time that we begin to focus on things not that we think work, that the teachers and the principals and the elected officials locally, but more importantly, the community decide that it works. Johnny alluded to a number of things that we use as far as how we gauge success or failure. I'm going to tell you the gauge we ought to have is what's a parent think? And the likelihood is by the time we get those standard tests, it's probably too late to fix it for their kids, but it may fix it for somebody else's. What we're attempting to do today as we reform K-12 education through these bills is we're trying to lay the gauntlet down and say no child will be exposed to an inferior education in the future because we're going to empower not Washington, we're going to empower the local community. Now again, simply what I'm doing in the Empowering Local Education Decision-Making Act of 2011 is to take 59 programs under the elementary and secondary education and to put them into 2 flexible foundational block grants. Now some might say, well, the state's going to steal money off of it. No, we limit. The state can get 1.5% to administer the program. It's got a strict formula that says exactly how this money is going to be distributed, so it's done fairly. Where we don't exercise Washington authority is we don't tell the local school system, here's the only way you can use it. We say to the local school system, here are 59 programs. You pick the ones that best fit what your needs are in your community. In addition to that, those 2 pots of money that we've created are 100% transferable. If you feel that one pot doesn't meet the need, which might be in your area, then you can shift all that money over to the other pot. So if you believe that focusing on teacher quality is better versus students, you've got the flexibility to do it without asking us for a waiver. In addition to that, if Title I is somewhere where you need additional funds, both pots of money are transitional to Title I to additionally support at-risk kids. There's something that we've never done here. Just this week, I received from the Council of Great City Schools, coalition, by the way, of our nation's largest central school districts. In their letter, and I quote, they wrote this: both Title II and Title IV of the Elementary Secondary Education Act have become unwieldy and unfocused over the past authorizations and are in substantial need of rewriting. Your effort to simplify and clarify the purposes and flexibilities within these programs is noteworthy. With budgetary constraints faced at all levels of government, streamlining federal requirements, providing predictable and consolidated formula-based funding streams to local school districts and ensure local district decision-making in the use of these funds under your bill is particularly welcomed. I urge my colleagues, read these bills. Look at your school systems. Make a decision that's right for the future of every child in this country and support our reauthorization efforts. I thank the Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I thank the Senator from North Carolina, Senator Burr, for his insight and leadership on how do we help create an environment in which teachers, parents, principals, and community leaders can make schools better rather than send orders from Washington to tell them how to do that. Senator Kirk from Illinois will be here within a few minutes to introduce the charter school bill, which is the same bill that passed the House of Representatives yesterday with, I believe, about 365 votes in a bipartisan way. As I mentioned at the outset, our purpose here today is to get things moving. We think there ought to be a law before the end of the year that fixes No Child Left Behind. And toward that end, the senior member of the Senate Health, Education, and Labor Committee, Senator Enzi of Wyoming, began quietly more than a year ago to meet with the chairman of the committee, Senator Harkin, and with Secretary Duncan, and on some occasions with the President. And we were able to come to a good deal of agreement about fixing No Child Left Behind, and then on the 9 areas that we would focus on, which I put into the record a few minutes ago, Senator Enzi is here, and I thought he might want to speak about that, because while all of us who are introducing these bills today are Republicans, we're only doing that as a way of moving the process and hoping to attract Democratic support so we can have a bipartisan result. I believe at the same time Senator Enzi is continuing to meet with Senator Harkin, the chairman of the committee, with the hope that we'll achieve that bipartisan result.
Senator from Wyoming.
I want to thank the senators who have spoken for all of their efforts and thought. A lot of times people think that what's being discussed on the floor here is the only thing that's happening with Congress. There are things happening in the background that are probably achieving more than the debates that happen here. A lot of times what you get to see here is the blood on the floor that results in nothing. But everyone recognizes the importance of education and recognizes that there was a significant effort made since 1965 with K through 12 education. It's been renewed several times. In every single instance, it's been renewed in a very bipartisan way. We want that to continue to happen. The value of the Senate and the House is to have a lot of different opinions on how something can be done, and then to bring those together to form something usable in whatever area we're working on. I just can't thank Senators Alexander, Isaacson, Burr, and Kirk enough for the work that they've done in this area. It does help us to focus, and I am working with Senator Harkin to try and come up with a bipartisan bill, and I think we've been making good progress. I've used these parts of the bills that you've heard about as reasons for stepping back and taking a look at what we're really doing to make sure that the states can have as much of a role as possible, but the local people have an even greater role in what's happening in education. And that's where we're trying to keep the focus. And this has been very helpful in my discussions with Senator Harkin to make sure that we stay on track with those things. Senator Alexander mentioned the 9 things, and Secretary Duncan traveled through most of the United States holding listening sessions to see what kinds of problems people had. And he agreed that the 9 things that we had on this list were the problems with No Child Left Behind that needed to be fixed. And Senator Harkin looked at that list and agreed in the same way. And so we've come up with some solutions, and those need to be put into a bill, and that bill needs to be passed this year. Next year we get into presidential elections. I can't see where that's going to make things more bipartisan or help education. There are a number of things that No Child Left Behind did. One is the disaggregation, which did show some problems across the country where kids were being left behind. A lot of times when we focus on education, we focus on the state and we focus on the school district. Once in a while we focus on the school, but what we've been trying to do is get the focus on the kid to make sure that our children are learning what they need to know to be able to survive in this. And that's one of the places that we'll be able to greatly improve as we move on in this. One of the surprises to everybody would probably be to find out that the federal government only requires 1 federal test. You always hear about all the testing the kids have to do across the nation. Well, a lot of that's locally imposed. That's tests that they think are necessary. But the federal government says you need to have 1 at the end of the year, and that's what we've concentrated on with the disaggregation. So there have been a lot of surprises for people as they actually take a look at what that rather voluminous bill has in it. And I think we are moving to a point where we should be able to get something done and get something done relatively quickly. And again, it'll be because of the work of these people that have put together some bills to bring attention to some very specific parts that need some improvement. And I thank you for doing that. I yield the floor.
Thank you.